Hi, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I'm doing yet another installment of the freelancer Q&A that I do here in Circle, and then also on the in the Hit Subscribe community YouTube channel. We've actually, for anybody interested, you can go check this out. But we have created a Hit Subscribe community YouTube channel, and then a similarly branded Hit Subscribe channel with content marketing content, mostly about client Q&A. I haven't published anything in that latter channel just yet, but maybe by the time this is live, I will have. I'm trying to build up kind of a war chest of videos for that channel. So go check it out sometime if you are so inclined. But this video is going into the community channel. That is the freelancer Q&A that I've been doing for a few years on this channel, mainly aimed at the folks in our community and in our author pool that are indies or aspiring indies and side hustlers. And today's question is actually, this came from, I want to say it was this came from somebody that was a freelance writer. And I think it might have been a DM in a community I was in. I'm not sure. But the question is, how do you handle moving from one niche to another, like going from health to cybersecurity? So that's the question that I want to answer here today. And it helps to understand that the person talking about this is talking about writing, and that's what they mean about a niche. And I think that's an important distinction to make compared to a lot of the videos that I do where the freelancers in question are engineers, because this would be different if it were being asked by an engineer. Because frankly, the answer would be you probably don't need to do all that much if you're going from working on like some kind of application in health to like an application in cybersecurity. I mean, like, maybe the stacks would be a little different, but it would be more or less the same thing. However, this is much more of a significant question for somebody who is doing freelance writing for businesses that are in these spaces. So I wanted to mention that first and foremost, and then I'm going to give an answer to how to handle this. But before I do that, I'm going to do some term definition. And then after I give the answer, this is going to be of the Stack Overflow sort of thing where I kind of say like, all right, well, here's how I do it, but also here's why I wouldn't really think of it this way. So that's going to be at the end. I do want to answer the question though. So before we go any further, the phrasing of this, and I in the title put niche in quotes, single quotes, to indicate, I think this is how you do this grammatically, that I'm sort of treating the term as verbatim, even though I don't agree with how it's being defined. And to expand on that a little bit, let me define a few terms here. So the question is, how do you handle moving from one niche to another as a freelance writer? And so I've been writing about and writing for companies that are marketing to people in healthcare. And now I want to move to companies that are marketing to people in cybersecurity, and writing about cybersecurity is part of what I'm doing. And I would argue that this is not at all a niche. You might call this a specialty. So I'll see if I can dig this up for YouTube. But I think in the past, I've talked about the difference between a niche and a specialty, some terms in the space. And I don't mean this just to be pedantic. I think it's important to get some precision around this. So to me, a niche is a gap in the market. A niche is, there is some unmet demand in the market. There is some arbitrage you can create by filling the niche. So a bunch of years ago, I wrote a piece of content for deadtech.com that kind of like used an absurd example to explain this. And I said, like, if memory serves, like, imagine that some of the laws of physics stopped working and like radio broadcast wasn't a thing anymore, meaning your cell phone is now a brick. You can't do anything with it. Now, let's also say in this weird hypothetical sci-fi scenario that I'm creating, I had for some reason hoarded a bunch of those old phones that are probably going to be hard to find now, where all they really need to run, it's not even a cordless, home phone. It's like one of those old ones that you could just run on the power coming over the telephone wire jack. So basically it's this phone that you plug in and it doesn't require any power to run. Now, suddenly the only way that we're able to make phone calls is with these old style phones. And if I had hoarded a bunch of those because I was a weirdo and they were suddenly in lots of demand, I would be filling a niche. So the niche would be the sudden, completely unplanned for demand for these things. And the fact that I had a storage locker full of them and could suddenly sell them for, $300 each or whatever. There's no skill to that. There's nothing that I've done or cultivated. There's no specialty that I have. but I am filling a niche. I am filling a gap in the market. There is a demand for these things. There's a need for these things. And so the difference between a niche and a specialty, a niche is really a reflection of the demand in the market or the lack of supply of some kind of service, the gap between supply and demand. A specialty, this is going to apply to you, and this is your differentiator as you presumably fill some sort of niche. So if you're writing, so what we're talking about here, moving from one niche to another, is really more about a specialty. So if you're a trained writer, you know, maybe from a journalistic background or a comms background or something, and you think of yourself as kind of an undifferentiated commodity, like, you know, everybody writes about whatever. But I, on the other hand, I focus exclusively on writing about health, or in the new world here, about cybersecurity. I would say that's more of a specialty than a niche. So whatever you decide to write about, wherever your skills and knowledge lie, that's not a reflection of what's going on or demanded in the market per se. That's a reflection of skills that you have acquired and what you bring to the table. And I would call that a specialty. And it is entirely possible to have a really killer, interesting, fascinating specialty that serves no niche whatsoever. You know, if you can speed run like all of the Mario franchise games in a row without resting, that's impressive, and it might be a specialty, but I would argue there's no like real market demand for that. So anyway, I think those are important terms to define. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention here is what you're really talking about, even more than a specialty. If you're talking about, I've been writing for companies that are talking about healthcare, so I've been writing about healthcare, and now I want to write about social security, or sorry, cybersecurity, social security. Really, what you're talking about more is who you're writing for is kind of a reflection of who your clients are marketing to and what industry they're in. And so really you're more identifying your ideal customer profile. So if you want to write about topics related to healthcare, because you're knowledgeable about that, this is really, you know, talking about writing for those types of businesses is really, you're just identifying businesses that are in healthcare and or marketing to healthcare. So more than anything else, this specialty you have is really just who you're looking to do work for, who your ideal buyers are. So I'll leave it at that. I just wanted to define and be really clear about these terms that I'm using, because it's going to be important for the rest of what I'm talking about here, especially the section where I go beyond just saying how I would go about making this transition. But before getting into that other thing, let me talk about how I would go about making this transition as somebody who runs a business that is in the, well, business of designing content operations, fulfilling content, planning around content, etc. I certainly have some opinions on how to go about navigating a switch like this and maybe the motivations for it. So let's say that you're writing about healthcare, and I don't even think I could go find the Slack anymore to refer to this, but if memory serves, I believe the motivation for making the switch was around perceived compensation. So it's more lucrative to write about Social Security than healthcare. So you are looking to make a jump from writing about healthcare for companies that are marketing in and around healthcare to writing about cybersecurity for companies that are marketing in and around cybersecurity. How would you go about doing that? The first thing I would do, since we're talking about somebody who is probably not a subject matter expert in either one of these things, first and foremost, like I don't believe, if memory serves, the person we're talking about was either some kind of doctor or healthcare professional, nor are they, or are they intending to become a, you know, certified cybersecurity expert or to get a degree in, you know, some related field or whatever. So, you're ultimately not really a subject matter expert. And what you're talking about doing is going from writing about health related topics to writing about cybersecurity related topics. For me, if I were you, to get a foot in the door, the first thing I would do is actually lower, not raise my rate, because you're trying to get a bit of credibility in writing about this topic. You want to get a few at bats in there. So the first thing I would do is offer to write inexpensively and then get a few clients in the cybersecurity arena that have need for somebody less expensive than their uber expensive SMEs that are, you know, CISOs or whatever they may be, who are charging you their like cybersecurity rate card to write about cybersecurity. So those are people where you're going to have, you know, content that you're paying, you know, dollars per word for. So if you come in offering to do that content for like 25 cents a word or something like that, you can become a less expensive alternative that those firms turn to for content that is a little bit less specialized in nature. So if they're planning out a kind of healthy content backlog full of white papers, blog posts, and that type of stuff, some of their content is going to be a lot more general than others. So if it's like SEO topics that are like, what is term X in cybersecurity, that doesn't require nearly as much knowledge of the space as it would if they were writing some kind of buyer's guide like an analyst. So if you make yourself available to write the content that is less specialized in that field, you'll probably get a good amount of business because those content managers or whoever's requisitioning the content are probably used to it being very expensive. So you can get your foot in the door by being a less expensive alternative. Now, I wouldn't go bargain basement here, not so much because I'm, figuring out how you can pay your mortgage or whatever. But if you go too low in price, you won't seem credible. So if you've been writing and charging a healthy amount in the health space, I would lower that probably a little bit, seem, like a very refreshingly inexpensive alternative to fill up part of their editorial calendar, but not so cheap that it feels like you've never done any kind of professional content before. So start there. Get some at bats, and what's going to happen is you're going to get a little bit of credibility. You're adding to your portfolio of content. Having written about cybersecurity topics, you're going to establish some client relationships, and you're also going to start, osmosising up some knowledge about social security. Why do I keep doing that? Cybersecurity, not social security. So you're going to start assimilating some of that knowledge. I would also, if you have some spare time or especially downtime, professional time, start assimilating as much knowledge as you possibly can about cybersecurity. Start listening to podcasts, coming to understand how people use terms of art and so on and so forth. So supplement your work in writing with a lot of learning about that field. And then as you're doing that, you can gradually start to seek out new clients, raise your rates with existing ones, et cetera. Like as you become more established writing about those topics, as you start to have a book of business consisting of companies in that niche, as you start to be more generally knowledgeable about the terms of art and so on, it will become progressively easier to increase your rates, probably beyond where they were in health, because just imagining that I were going to go out and source content in each of these spaces, I would expect to budget more for cybersecurity specialists than people talking about health topics, unless they were super specialized health topics. So if you were writing the kind of stuff that you borderline need like a nurse practitioner or doctor knowledge to write about, that you might not be making more money. But from what I remember, it was kind of clear that it would be a step up comp wise. So that is how I would approach navigating that transition. Now, again, you're not moving from one niche to another. You're moving from one type of customer to another. You could call it moving up market. The people that are talking about cybersecurity topics, on average, are probably going to have more budget, and on average, are probably going to have to pay more to a more expensive flavored professional than the old customers you have. But I don't view this as material different than if you're working with deep-pocketed Fortune 500 enterprises. You're probably also able to charge more than if you're working with like bootstrap early stage startups. So either way, you're kind of moving up market, and that's really what you're doing. It's about your buyers more than it is about you and your specialty, and certainly a niche. You're still filling the same niche, which and I don't mean any offense by this, but is commodified content creation. So it's a staffing niche really that you're filling, if we're being precise about the term niche. And actually, that's a kind of a good segue into if you want to think about making yourself more money over the course of your career, and crucially, making the business that you are in more profitable, then you're going to need to think about this a different way, because what you're doing here is buying yourself a little bit of time and increased top line revenue with still a fairly low ceiling. And to understand what I'm getting at here, let me maybe switch gears a little bit and talk about, let's say that you sell hourly application development labor. And I don't know what this goes for. The last time I was paying people to write software was some number of years ago now, and maybe like a average market rate at agency-ish place would have been $150 an hour. I don't know what it is these days, but let's say that it's still $150 an hour for argument's sake that you would pay, or you could expect to make as a software developer on the market. Now, let's say that you want to increase that hourly rate. You want to make more money and get compensated more for your time. You can certainly do that. You could so as a software developer making $150 an hour, you're doing commodity labor. You are essentially fungible with other comparable software engineers. I know C# and web development, and so do millions of other engineers that you could evaluate me against. So what you could do in that space to raise your rates would be to zoom in on something that was maybe in scarcer supply and thus relatively more demand and charge $200 an hour. I'm a, .NET web developer, but also specializing in performance or something like that. And if you navigated that right, you could give yourself a bit of an hourly bump. But what you can never do in that world is move to charging $400 or $800 or $1,200 an hour for some kind of app dev, because there is a hard ceiling across all people doing app dev in the industry, even a little bit more specialized, where you're just not going to get much above probably $250 an hour. Because as soon as you go up above that, you just move out of the expected band of that type of commodity labor, and people just say, no, that isn't what this type of thing costs. In the same way that I bet you wouldn't pay $500 for a print book. Unless you had a professor, maybe in academia somewhere, but in general, you have an expected range of prices that you pay for a book that's probably between, like $5 and $50. So if a book were 10 times that amount, you would just not buy it. It's just not what books cost. It's just out of the realm of possibility. So that happens in the app dev world. It happens with books, and it's going to happen with you in content creation. So all you're really doing, sure, you're giving yourself, you're actually doing a lot of work to manufacture a bit of a pay increase for yourself, but it's probably the last one you're going to get. It's not going to get too much more lucrative no matter what you do. So the thing to ask yourself here is, are you looking over the long haul to just kind of indefinitely do freelance work, or are you potentially looking to start to do something that is more lucrative? Like, are you going to, because sooner or later, you're going to cap out on what anyone will pay you to write blog content or white papers or whatever. You can keep looking for a slightly higher rate, in this cadre of authors about a topic, but sooner or later, you're going to max out. And probably if you do this jump, you're going to max out. There's, probably not going to find a lot more money anywhere above cybersecurity. So then you would need to think about how you could go about continuing to grow in terms of the money that you were earning. But really, in order to grow beyond a certain amount, you have to build what's called an equity business. You have to build some kind of concept of profit into your business. And that's going to mean that you have to decouple charging by your time, even if it's a proxy for that, like charging by the word or something. So I'm not going to go into pricing theory. That's beyond the scope of this video, but it is worth thinking about that. What you're trying to do here is something that you get to do once or twice, and then you've kind of exhausted it. So it is a good short-term to medium-term way to potentially earn more money. But if you're serious about continuing to grow, how lucrative what you're doing is, you're going to need to think differently fundamentally about your business. And in order for you to do that, instead of looking around and saying, what thing can I write about that will cause people to pay me more, you have to start actually thinking about a niche and asking yourself, what demand can I meet for my clients for which they would pay more? And if you're doing content creation, for instance, what content creation is typically going to be used for is lead generation. And so you would need to start thinking about your buyers and your clients and what their actual business goals were in order to eventually earn better compensation. And that is, especially given that I can see I'm about at the time for a normal one of these videos, that's going to be a topic for another day, but it is worth bearing in mind. There is only so far that this is going to take you. And if that's good enough, God bless. I don't mean to say that it shouldn't be, but this is a fairly ambitious move. And the person talking about doing this is about to do a whole lot of learning and drinking from a fire hose in order to make a little bit more money with a hard ceiling on it. So I think what I'm getting at is I would spend less time trying to learn a slightly different discipline so you can move slightly up market and charge slightly more for the same commodified labor. I would instead think about how can you uncommodify your labor by identifying a profitable niche to fill, identifying a demand that isn't currently being met by climbing the value chain above maybe your current, content manager. What does that person's boss want? What does that person's skip level want? And starting to think about things like that and how you could help those companies achieve transformations and maybe drive some kind of business outcome. So anyway, I hope that answers the question and more, and is at least passingly interesting to the community. And in case the person originally asking the question is watching, hopefully that helps. And I will catch you all next time.